Welcome to another episode of our OpenIntro Podcast series. This is a chance for you to really get to understand the leaders on the platform, get an opportunity to hear about their stories and so much more. And today's episode, we have the wonderful and amazing Andrew Chen. Andrew, how are you?
Fantastic. Thanks for having me on.
No, absolutely. No problem at all. I mean, thank you for your time. I know you're incredibly busy at the moment. So thank you for the opportunity just to speak with you today. Today's show, Andy, what we really want to do is just really dive into a couple of things, really. One, a little bit about your experience and your views on the world, but really get into the concepts of entrepreneurial storytelling. So often when it comes to business, entrepreneurs mainly have a challenge of really getting across the really essence of what they do and why they do it. And we know that storytelling is a really great way of having a framework and a narrative and a concept for doing that. So I really like to dive into that. But first and foremost, if you can maybe just give our viewers a bit of an insight into who you are, what you do, and why you do what you do.
Yeah, thanks. I'll try to keep it short. Yeah, I'm really mainly come from the entrepreneur operator point of view. I started way back in the day. My first startup was in 1995, where we were selling sporting goods online in the early days of e-commerce, competing against Amazon, etc. That was super exciting. We got super lucky to rise in that first bubble and eventually IPO'd in 2000.
Excellent.
Then my next startup came a few years later where we were selling software to e-commerce companies. And that was super exciting as well. We grew that for about 7 years, got acquired. And since then, I've been mainly angel investing, advising other startups, really helping. I love kind of these nascent startup ecosystem. So I was in Seattle for a little bit, doing some angel investing and advising, and in New York. And now I'm in Lisbon. I also joined a Indian startup in Delhi.
Oh.
So they were one of the first kind of, I don't know, just a first kind of similar looking startup to the early days of San Francisco. And so that was super exciting to learn India. They were basically a whole bunch of kids operating in Delhi, selling a self-service software, and they wanted to move to enterprise and move into the US. So it was very exciting to bring them into the US and help them sell kind of the bigger deals. But yeah, now I'm in Lisbon trying to do the same thing, really trying to learn and develop the ecosystem here.
Now, it strikes me, Andy, that you've had, both as an entrepreneur and a successful entrepreneur at that in your own right, and then taking that knowledge in those different spaces. There must be so many stories you've actually seen, heard, way that people have communicated their business. And I can also imagine that there's been much feedback from investors, yourself as an investor, other investors in your network perhaps who have given feedback to those businesses. But what has been your number one starting point when you've started talking about storytelling with founders? If they wanted to really tell a really great story about their business, where would you suggest for them to start?
Yeah, I think I'm a little bit different than most investors. So what I find nowadays is a lot of entrepreneurs, they're studying all the tips and tricks on how to do a pitch. And what I find is that a lot of authenticity gets lost. And so for me, I tend to value authenticity and a compelling, cohesive story versus hitting all the checks, checking all the boxes.
What if an entrepreneur feels
So,
uncomfortable though in being their authentic self? I mean, obviously, business is people first, as much as whoever wants to say and disagree with that, fine. But it is about people first. And I guess, how do you help entrepreneurs who can't feel they can be their authentic self?
yeah, I think this is like this is a hard thing.
Yeah.
I mean, nowadays it's interesting because I think technology, except for the deep tech type
Yeah.
things, most technology is kind of commoditized. It's not what tech you're using or what your algorithm is. These things are not as complicated as they used to be. And it's oftentimes not even the business model. You can almost, these business models a lot of times are, most people are not the first person to think of the model.
Right.
So what I really tend to is think of who is the team I really trust to run with that idea, to be flexible, that I like, that I want to be working with over the years, that I trust are not just telling me a story, because they want to raise money,
Really good point.
but not really believing in what they're doing. So I think the grit and I don't know, just my connection with the entrepreneur is really really important.
So would you say that grit and that sense of resilience is what, I guess, cements that trust? It's that you get a feeling that they're willing to walk through the fire that they don't even know about yet, to a degree, or the hurdles that they're going to face.
Yeah, I think there's two types of grit. One is to walk through the
Yeah.
fire, but the other piece is to just believe in something enough that they're gonna just kind of deal with the hardships that always come along. And I think it's easier, especially in beautiful places like Lisbon, it's easier to have a lifestyle startup,
Yeah.
and those don't last so long. I mean, maybe some do, but generally I found that the lifestyle businesses are really hard to make
That's a
successful.
really good point, actually. Can we dive into that a little bit? Because in this day and age, as you said, a lot of technology is commoditized, a lot of business models are not necessarily original. It's very attractive to create a lifestyle business just to get comfortable. You want to scale it, but you want to scale it to a point, and then you don't want to do much more after that. You want to make it, very much part of your lifestyle. And then you've got the other type of entrepreneur who wants to literally change industries, literally change the world. And do you see a complete difference in the mindset of those individuals?
Well, there's two things that I think wanting to change the world is these ideas are
Yeah,
hard.
100%.
So I think actually most of the businesses I talk to, they're not trying to change the world. Maybe they're trying to do a part of something that is happening, be part of it, but changing the world, I think, is for me feels a little bit overdone. That's like if you want to raise money from Andreessen Horowitz and your only target is one of those top 3 VCs that only want to change the world, fine. But most of the businesses are just businesses. But maybe it's part of the green energy transition, and it could, but that's not the point. Your point is to run a good business. So I think most businesses need to stand on their own as a business with, something they do with a good plan. And the difference is, this is what I think of. If someone tells me their business, I all of a sudden I have their business plan in mind, right? So then the question is, why would I trust you to run it? Or why do I want you running it instead of me?
Right, right.
That's the question. And I want you to run it because you're deep into it. You care greatly about it. You're vested in the success. You didn't just write a business plan that you thought was clever in business school,
Right.
right? That's maybe that works, but that's not what I look for.
That's very interesting. I respect that. That's a great question, actually. Could you run this business rather than myself? And I think a lot of, certainly my experience as both a founder and a supporter of entrepreneurs, it's one of the biggest challenges is when you come to those touch points where you need to really, or when your character's tested, when the novelty's worn off now, you're in the trenches in this business. You want to know who's shoulder to shoulder next to you in your team. You want to know which your customers are the most loyal, which your support, suppliers are going to be, a bit more sympathetic to the challenges you're going through. Your board have got your back, all of that type of stuff. In your experiences with your startups and where you took them, did you feel in those moments that you had that support around you, and were the things that were the traits that you saw in the people around you that you look for in entrepreneurs that you work with now?
Yeah, I think in all of my businesses, like we've been scrappy. I think our investors have
Yeah, I
loved
like
that.
that. The underdog
So
mentality, right?
yeah, we didn't have the luxury of trying to like envision changing the world. Was very pragmatic,
Yeah.
talking to our customers, figuring out what they needed, figuring out if we could build it and serve them and try to survive.
Yeah.
And you naturally become attached to those customers and attached to the people that you're working with. I
Good
think that
stuff.
yeah, I think there's also this curse of raising too much money. There was a time where we raised too much money and then we kind of got sloppy. So we started to kind of get beyond actually where we were and became theoretical instead of really grounded.
Right. The more money you got, the more complacent you might have felt that you were getting, and more, as you say, theoretical rather than focusing on what got you there in the first place, which is those relationships, that kind of scrapping.
Yeah, I mean, this is the maybe the thing that always triggers me when I'm on a call with an entrepreneur, like I ask them, "Oh, who are you selling to?"
Mm.
And they say, "Oh, well, everyone
Yeah.
can buy it. Everyone that wants to increase sales." Yeah, but
Get
are
niche,
you
get
talking
niche, get
about
niche.
are you talking about Coca-Cola? Or are you talking about the mom and pop restaurant down the street?
Mm.
Oh, it could be anyone. Yeah, but who's gonna, so like really what I want is if you say I'm selling to mom and pop, I know you're gonna be going and talking to every, the mom and pop stores on your street
Yeah.
and understanding their problems, not doing some PowerPoint about increasing sales to everyone,
Yeah, I hear that.
which feels impossible.
Absolutely. No, I absolutely hear that. So, you've talked a little about authenticity, you've talked a little about building that trust, understanding your customer, who your customer is in that niche. Would you say those are key components of this kind of storytelling that the entrepreneur needs to go through to be very clear about those types of things?
Yeah, well, storytelling's actually, it's funny. I just attended a masterclass in storytelling yesterday, and I wrote down kind of one of their models. Is really interesting. They have a triangle with 3 points on it,
Mm-hmm.
and the 3 points are education, entertainment, and enlightenment.
Yeah.
Am I telling you something new? Is it fun? Am I leaning into the conversation or waiting it to end? And is my perspective on the world different because of this conversation?
Mm.
And that's about generally about storytelling. But actually, it struck me as very. There's this other part she added to there was sincerity, but it struck me as like a really good model for a pitch deck because they see a lot of the pitches. They can read way faster than you can
Yeah.
speak. So if you're not kind of providing these three elements, there's no point of you being in person. Just send me an email. And so for me, I love pitches, even if they're bad businesses. Even if I can't see it immediately, if I feel like they've told me something different about an industry, how industry works, about what a trend that is coming that where I can buy into, where I like them, where I feel like I'm not bored and starting to Google while they're speaking.
Which I've seen VCs
I
actually
can
do
spend
directly,
time.
actually, in
Yeah,
a meeting.
every VC does this. If they're not lying, they're verifiable facts that I can just look
Yeah.
up. Like you're not the first.
Yeah.
Almost no company is the first. But I am willing to spend a lot of time and energy thinking about that business, trying to help them come up with a plan that's fundable. If I feel like it's generic, if I'm bored, I don't trust them, then there's plenty of other entrepreneurs I can talk to.
Yeah. And I think that's,
So I think we're fighting for attention and energy of investors.
that's a really good point because I think, have been on the investing table as well and seeing these opportunities, you can be very much so hopeful of finding a business that you truly want to support. And you can actually sometimes feel, leaving the room feeling disappointed that the entrepreneurs in the room weren't really fighting for that little bit of attention that I'm really giving them and maximizing it. It's almost as if you've said exactly the same pitch to another 10, 100 VCs like me. It's sometimes we forget that the VC is also the customer, quote unquote, in that type of situation. Are you really meeting my need as the investor? Not financially, but do you understand what I'm looking for from a pitch, looking for from a business opportunity in that regard? And I hear you in terms of that fighting for energy and fighting for that time. I've seen many entrepreneurs, and I think I've probably done it my own self in the early days of pitching for financing myself. It was you're so wrapped into what you want to get across, you forget that it's about that human connection with that investor or investors across the table and what is it that they actually want or need. How do you find that, you say you're in Lisbon now and in the ecosystem there. What's been the response to, I guess, some of that kind of language in helping entrepreneurs in that, nascent ecosystem? What's the response been like?
It's been, I mean, I think it's been pretty good. It's interesting because here in Lisbon, I'm mainly mentoring. I mentor through a few
Yeah.
accelerators, but I've had relationships with some entrepreneurs who have moved on to second or third startups, but they keep calling me to get my feedback. I mean, I think what I do in particular is I help entrepreneurs kind of become honest with themselves, because I think there's a little bit of a curse of the lean startup canvas, where a lot of startups are trying to force answers into areas where they don't really know an answer or have a good answer. And so startups or pitches start to feel generic to me. And so what I really try to do is just help identify these are the real challenges that we don't know the answer to. And these are the real exciting opportunities that maybe we should lean into. Yeah. And then it doesn't have to be perfect answers across every element of the lean startup canvas to be a pitch. It just has to be inspirational.
I hear that kind of E and the enlightenment on your triangle piece there. I think what's really interesting what you're saying there is even if an entrepreneur hits all of those structured check boxes, if you like, then it has almost the perfect pitch deck, for argument's sake. Having a perfect pitch deck doesn't actually, it just makes it seem normal against other pitch decks. Like perfection actually creates normality, which doesn't really seem to fit, it seems, in the modern day. You want something that's a rebel to that, would you say?
Yeah, or I could feed the business idea into ChatGPT and have it write the pitch deck for me, right?
Yeah.
But what's the point of that?
Yeah.
But also, if it's a great pitch deck, why aren't you raising $10 million instead of $1 million? Why are you talking to me? Like
Preach.
the businesses aren't that great. You should be talking with someone in Silicon
That's a
Valley and
really good
raising
point.
$100 million if you have that great of a business. So it's just not true.
That's a really good point, because there may be almost a fear of wanting to raise that high. It's safe to do a perfect pitch deck for $1 million. Well, is it? Are you discounting the value of what you actually are creating by not having a little bit more confidence, would you say, in the idea?
I think there's two. I think no business is perfect. Like I don't think any business in the world has started with the business plan and been successful with the same business plan.
Yeah.
So the pitch deck is just a representation of your thought process and your approach to a business. It's not the perfect roadmap. Maybe Elon Musk had the perfect roadmap. Who knows? Maybe one of the elite entrepreneurs in the world, maybe they actually did what they said they were going to do. Maybe Amazon, maybe Bezos. I feel like he's close.
Yeah, he's definitely close.
But not Apple, not Google, not most companies.
Yeah.
So the pitch deck is just a reflection of the start of the entrepreneur, and if it's generic, I kind of I mean, obviously, if it's a great business idea, then I get excited on its own. But I think it's easier to have a okay business idea, but to have people like you enough to help you, than to have an incredible business idea that no one else has thought about, and you're the only one that can execute it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It goes back to your earlier point around trust and seeing that grit and that authenticity in that person. It's really important.
I mean, yeah, I talk to lots of companies, and then they're it's a great model. There's a company called Rocket Internet in Germany. They're public, and the way they started, their model is super simple. We're just going to take the ideas that worked in the U.S. We're going to replicate the technology and customize it to the European market, and they did great. They didn't try to say that they're changing the world. They didn't try to say they're coming up with new ideas. They're just saying we're going to take it and we think it's a good business and we're going to do it here. Great. So it doesn't have to be mind blowing to be a great business.
Just gotta think about who you will. Be very clear on your customer, very clear on what you're doing, and just be a great person with a great personality.
Yeah, and then you tune your whole business and process around being successful doing that. I mean, the thing about it is, sorry, I start to ramble. But the thing about it is, there are very few new ideas, right? I always talk to people who's like, oh man, I had that idea first. I was talking about this a long time ago. It doesn't matter. It's the person that decides to do it. And probably for every person who decided to do it, thousands of people tried as well. So you're the person that somehow figured out the right formula, and you were lucky enough to come on top. But deciding to do it is a big step. But also like having some sort of thought process on how you're going to do it and why you think your way is going to be better is also good. But the idea itself is, for me, not so exciting.
And so when you're seeing, well, let's dive into that. So when you're looking at, when you hear an idea, but you don't see any substance behind it, then shall we say, in terms of the mechanics of how they're going to execute in it, in terms of processes or systems or etc. At that stage, do you still look for the richness of the idea in that storytelling process? Not just telling you about the business, you want to see that kind of almost story around the idea as part of the whole storytelling of the pitch.
I mean, there's a whole bunch of layers.
Yeah, that's what
There's
I'm trying
number
to
one.
break through. Yeah,
Yeah, the first is just what is the story? What are you doing?
yeah,
But the second is how does your telling a story make me believe that what you're saying is true and authentic? So
do you have an example?
so I in a startup Lisboa, I give a
Yeah,
speech on how to do a pitch deck, and I have a concept called the bar pitch. I hate elevator pitch.
yeah.
So the bar pitch is, how do I tell the story to a stranger at a bar that knows nothing about what I do? How can I tell it to my mom? Right. So what I'm trying to do is connect the idea to something a random person can understand and say, yeah, that totally makes sense. Or yeah, that, like, why hasn't someone done that before? I don't want to hear jargon. I don't care if you're programming in Python or your backend is blah, 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 or that you have an app. Everyone has an app. Like, no one cares if there's an app. Like, I want you to be able to explain it clearly to anyone in the room that's not a specialist.
Right.
And for me, actually, part of that storytelling is because the CEO, the person pitching, is also one selling the product to customers. So if you can't communicate clearly to someone at a bar, it's probably hard to communicate to VCs. Are, I mean, unless they're specialty, I don't know much about any particular industry, right? So don't use jargon with me.
Yeah, just talk straight.
Tell me about this, educate me about the industry, about what the opportunity is and what the problems are in a way that I can understand. And then also, you're oftentimes talking to a CEO that doesn't understand the details of what you're selling either. So you have to tell them in a way that they don't understand.
That's right.
So I think that there's that element of storytelling that gets lost. I think it's maybe because there are a lot of engineers that believe that the product itself will sell itself, and it's just not true. It's never true.
That's really, really powerful, Alexander. Yeah. That simplicity. And you know, we hear that all the time as entrepreneurs, right? You have to make the story simple. You can explain it to a 5-year-old, you know, your mother, your grand, complete stranger. But it's amazing how through fear, pride, lack of confidence, many entrepreneurs still try and provide that kind of slick, crystal kind of presentation around something that is very simple to understand. And you have to question whether they understand what they're doing themselves.
Yeah, it's like I don't know if you've studied sales methodologies, but in most sales methodologies, they have this concept of a champion. Well, there's two. There's a champion or a fox. The champion is the person that sells your product when you're not in the room.
Yep.
The fox is someone that is selling against you when you're not in the room, right? So as an entrepreneur, my job is to give tools to the champion that they can repeat to other people later. So the challenge with the bar pitch is, if I'm having a beer, sit next to some random person, and we have a chat, and I tell them what we do, am I giving them enough information that they could say, wow, I met this really interesting guy. He's doing this because of this. Can they tell the story to someone else later? That would be a quality bar pitch with it's interesting enough to repeat. Yeah. And it's simple enough that I can understand and relate to someone else that completely doesn't know what they're talking about. For me, that's an amazing pitch. And I find myself, when I talk to other investors, I'm the champion. I was like, I taught this really other company. They do this because of this. And if I can't remember exactly what they're like, I just don't tell the story. It's not interesting.
Yeah, that's important because you don't want to be trying to tell a story that you can't tell either.
It's completely true. It's like I'll go and I'll tell my girlfriend, interesting pitch. They were doing this. This was cool, and she's an artist. Yeah. But Man, sometimes I meet companies that inspire me to tell her about it, and she is excited about that company and hopes they exist. That's an amazing company.
It sounds so simple, doesn't it? But it's so powerful and so rich in terms of, the power of being able to get a simple idea across that people get so quickly that they're enthused to share with other people. Well, that's what every entrepreneur and every business owner would want, the ability to have their story told in exactly the same way that they want it told as well.
I mean, it's hard. This is a hard process because people like for me it's easy because I don't know anything about their
Yeah.
industry. So I can omit everything I don't know. But if you're in it, it's hard to it's a process to eliminate the things that you think are important but that aren't critical to what that champion needs to understand.
Yeah, yeah, I hear that. I hear that. Well, it strikes me that this whole art of storytelling has some really key things. As you started out talking about kind of understanding who the audience is, the authenticity in the individuals who are telling that story. Looking for the grit, looking for that drive, that sense of trust that you're building with them. And then obviously moving into kind of the story itself, and the clarity of the story, the simplicity of the story, and being able to share that story in a way that encourages other people to take that on board. Um, you know, what happens then post deal? So say the story's been amazing, they've got through the door, whatever the size of the deal, whichever route they're getting that money in. What happens then? What's been your experience and what have you seen in terms of continually telling that story post the deal? Is there a different story for different markets, different, one for your customers, one for your staff, or is there a kind of a generic story which carries weight across all? What's been your experiences of how you've interacted with people's deal?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's obviously a story that's part of the
Mm.
pitch, and then there's the messiness of having a startup. So I might have a story, but if I'm selling to mom and pops, but Coca-Cola comes in and says they want to be my customer, I'm going to sell to Coca-Cola. So it doesn't it's money, it's revenue, right? So I mean, maybe not if it kills me, but I'm going to
You've done best to try
deviate
it.
from my focus on the pitch that I'm saying my pitch. I'm going to be
Yeah.
opportunistic, or I'm going to have to sell to someone that I don't really feel like is the ideal customer. But in terms of what product do you build, which customers do you listen to most intently, in terms of how you tell the story to your employees, those things I think need to be aligned with your core strategy. And your core strategy needs to be consistent with your pitch needs to be guiding your core strategy.
Mm.
And obviously there's a process on continuously looking at it and revising it and seeing if it's true or seeing if this other opportunity starts to look better. You've learned something new. This is like the Indian company, we're an A/B testing company. So I've increasingly been thinking of startups as just a series of hypotheses and experiments to prove or disprove a thing that I thought might be true. And so I love startups that think ahead of like, okay, if this is true, then this is what my business means. This is what it can be. So I'm going to design an experiment to be done as quickly and cheaply and accurately as possible to see if that's true or not. If it's true, I'm going to do more. If it's not true, then I'm going to rethink my strategy.
Yeah.
And so I love entrepreneurs that have an urgency around uncovering those key important hypotheses about what their
Mm.
business strategy should be. The ones that are like just floating, trying to see what's going to happen, they don't have a direction, that are just kind of riding a wave. I find that they lack the discipline when things become hard to really become efficient with their time and energy.
That's a really good point. Right. Right. And even if they get investment that allows them to get into that kind of not positively, but maybe get to that kind of comfortable stage, that's the time when they need to be even more focused on that discipline, isn't it? Really, given the example you mentioned
Yeah.
earlier as well.
Yeah, you need to have a discipline. Assume that you're going to fail some. I mean, Elon Musk talks about it. It's like you should be failing a certain percentage of things because you're just testing
Mm.
ideas. Does this work? Nah, no, it didn't work. Move on to that other direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a whole process around it, and I think for me, it's undercover. understanding the entrepreneur's mindset and how they want to run the business that I think is important for me. So it's all related. There's no one thing that that's a showstopper or something that was like, oh, if they have this one element, I'm definitely in. But I do look for that consistency or a particular mindset. It's not that I'm right or wrong. It's just the type of person I like to work with and the conversations I like to have.
I hear that. I think it's important. And it goes back to your starting point of authenticity, and the importance of having that great relationship from an authentic and honest and trustworthy place with that entrepreneur or founder. And I think it's very, very important. I totally agree on that. Well, just looking at the time as we're beginning to close, I think one of the key things that really jump out is that real sense of relationship. I think the founders having a relationship with themselves to be honest and congruent about what they're wanting to create and sharing that message. The honesty between, the mentor, the investor, and that kind of entrepreneur to build the foundations together through support to be able to execute on that. And then also the relationships there with customers, with staff and others, other stakeholders to help you to move that business forward. But is there an immediate red flag that you look for as part of that storytelling context, though? I.e., is the red flag saying this is not going to be a story, this is going to be a long, drawn out, structured explanation? Is there an immediate red flag that you look for?
I think a lot of jargon, a lot of acronyms, a lot of trying to impress me by how confusing everything is. That's never good for me. But I think for me, I appreciate being able to have a conversation, say, I don't understand this, can you explain it? Or is this exactly true? Or is there like, how would we refine the idea? And being able to have a conversation instead of trying to pull teeth. Like there are some conversations where I feel like I'm pulling teeth to get past kind of the pitch mode. And for me, that's kind of a red flag because it's just not enjoyable. I feel like I get angry in those moments, and I put myself through that.
Yeah, I hear that. I respect that. Well, Andy, look, we could talk all day about this because I think there's so much richness and gems in what you've got. But unfortunately, we are running out of time a little bit. But this is a great example of why people should get in contact with you. So just as we finish off, could I ask you just to maybe share a closing thought that you'd maybe want to share with the viewers of this video in terms of, I guess, the art of storytelling or anything else that you feel you'd want to share?
Yeah, this is almost having this conversation is what it's the first conversation. Like if you set up an appointment with me, this is kind of what we talk about. We do the pitch and we try to get to like what is the meat of the pitch. But closing thought. I think that man, I feel like I've already said it all.
I'm literally just thinking that. I was sitting there
Okay,
thinking, you've actually said so much.
but I will say, this is what I will say. I think every entrepreneur is bombarded with advice, with tools, with processes. And so for me, I think you can't do everything. You can't follow every person's advice. And so for me, what I really want to get entrepreneurs to do is to really like think of what is true for themselves and follow that path.
Right.
Because I think that's going to be the most successful path, not trying to do everything for everyone. It's an impossible task and you start to look generic and scattered. I like the ideas to have a fire and a vision and a purpose and a direction. Those are the entrepreneurs that I really get excited about.
About the advice, but find your true path and just stay on it.
Yeah, there's no one right way. There's always exceptions. Yeah. There's millions of types of investors. So right now, what you're hearing is most of the advice is from the tech stars and the big popular ones. They have a point of view because they have a particular structure to their investment theme and type of companies they invest in. But there are all sorts of different investors. There are family offices, there are individual entrepreneurs, there are companies that have investment funds. So, if you do the thing that you think is important, find the investors that match how you're doing it and what you're doing. Don't try to sell something to someone that's not going to buy.
So that absolutely. And I guess finally, and you alluded to it earlier, but for those who want to contact you and spend some time with you through OpenIntro, what will they get for their time in speaking with you?
I mean, generally, what I like to do in the first session is just work on that bar pitch, because once we get the bar pitch, I find that it's pretty easy to refine, to expand that into a proper pitch. But without the bar pitch, it's too hard for me to understand. understand the business and like what's important to the entrepreneur.
Fantastic.
So I think that's usually the first 15-minute block is really just getting down to the nut of it. Then we sometimes talk about strategy or how we're going to sell or how to position or try to think of markets and all the other things that everyone needs to tend to eventually. But the nut of the idea, I think, is kind of the most important thing to get right early on.
That's right. Fantastic. Well, Andy, you've been absolutely amazing. I want to thank you for your time this morning. The art of storytelling is such a challenge for so many entrepreneurs, but it's so crucial as part of their growth and development of a business. So thank you for sharing all your insights. And for the viewers who are watching this video, we know that Andy's going to be an amazing confidant, mentor, and guide for you in what you want to do in your business. So if you want to really get the art of your storytelling correct, touch with Andy. So Andy, take care and I'll speak to you soon.
Thanks a lot, Blake. I really enjoyed it.
Bye bye.
Ciao.